There's a word in the watch enthusiast community that can leave a bit of a bad taste in your mouth. It certainly leaves a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth, and that word is consolidation. How are you watching, James? My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. And for me, the idea of consolidation doesn't actually make that much sense, because I think the idea, what people tend to talk about, especially in videos like this, is selling their larger collection of affordable watches and buying that one expensive watch. I kind of understand the theory behind that. I kind of understand that that could be okay for some people, but it just makes no sense to me. For me, it doesn't matter what the cost of the watch is. It doesn't mean that I would like it anymore. So why would I sell these affordable watches, the watches that I really like, to buy one expensive watch that I like? Selling a watch that I like to buy a watch that I like. It doesn't make sense to me. These more expensive watches generally have better movements, better finishing, perhaps even a better brand name on them. And yes, they may be better watches sometimes, but that doesn't mean that I'll like them more. So the idea of selling my watches to buy a watch that I just like equally as much makes no sense at all. However, what does make sense to me is partial consolidation. And not so much because of the money aspect, but more just the reduction of size of the collection. For most of us watch enthusiasts, us watch collectors, we tend to have in the back of our mind a sort of number that we are comfortable with how many watches we have in our collection. For some people it might be 1 or 2 or 3, for others it might be 1 or 2 or 3,000 watches. It all depends on the person, and there's no right or wrong number. For me, however, if I truly think about it, I think the right number for me is 10. The problem with the number 10 is that I have not owned that amount of watches for a very long time. In fact, up until recently, I had more than 30 watches. Now, I could afford that amount of watches in that collection. I justified that money. I'd put that money aside, so it wasn't a money thing. Yes, perhaps there's a lot of money in watches, more than I really need, but that wasn't the issue. It was the number of watches. I just felt like I had too many watches. I had so many watches that some of them that I really liked just weren't getting any wrist time. And something that I've noticed with myself is when I have around about 20 watches, I find that I almost get a little bit overwhelmed by the choice, and I end up not wearing many of the watches. I end up only wearing a few watches. It's like the more I have, the less I wear. And that doesn't make any sense to me. I buy watches because I love them. I buy watches because I'm interested in them, but I own and buy watches because I want to wear them. I'm not just theoretically in love with watches. I physically love watches and I want to wear them. So it doesn't make sense to me, both financially, but also just physically, to own something that I'm not actually utilizing and wearing. Which is why my whole watch collecting sort of path or journey has been amongst sort of buying watches, selling watches, buying watches, selling watches. Some stay for a short time, some stay for a medium time, some stay for a long time, and some also stay forever. But as I go down this journey of watch collecting, more and more of these watches that I'm buying are going away from the sales list and going into more the core collection, the watch collection that is not being sold. So that collection has been getting bigger and bigger, and I've then started wearing less and less of them. So it hasn't made sense to me having so many watches. So the idea of consolidation has been coming into my head. Not to spend that money on one watch, although it'd be nice to have some more money in my budget, because my budget's been getting smaller and smaller because all the money's in my watch collection, but that's not the primary reason. The primary reason is just to reduce the amount of watches that I have to a more comfortable level. The problem I've had with that recently, though, is all the watches that are in my collection are not watches that I want to sell. So I've had to make a decision. I don't actually have to make this decision, of course, but I've wanted to make this decision. I needed to be harsh on my collection and decide what watches do I actually really want to stay in there, and what watches am I sort of okay letting go. Because prior to this occasion, I have let watches go on many occasions, but I've only ever done that when I've worn them, loved them, enjoyed them, and now I'm got to the point where I either don't wear them or I felt like I've just had my time with them and I've been okay to let them go. Some of these watches that I end up selling, I haven't been quite at that point. But I've known that for me personally, it was time to reduce the collection. So I tried to be a little bit smart about it. I tried to be quite aggressive with how many watches I put aside that I was going to sell. But I took them all aside and I put them in a drawer. I thought, well, let's let them sit there for a few months or a couple of months, and so let's see how it feels. Let's see if I can live without them. And I'm very glad I did this, because one watch was taken back out of that drawer and put back into the collection. I'm so glad that I didn't end up selling it, because I think I would have felt like I'd made a mistake. However, the surprising part was that it was actually only one watch that came back out of the drawer. I almost expected a few more to come back out. So what I've ended up doing is selling probably about half of my collection. I have bought a couple more watches in the interim, because I've then had some more money to spend. I've ended up buying a couple more expensive watches because I've had the money available, but that wasn't the primary reason. The primary reason was just to reduce the collection. Now I'm going to show you the watches that I've sold, or at least some of the watches that I've sold, because I've sold quite a few watches, and some of them may be a bit of a surprise to you. It may be a bit of a surprise to you because I've spoken about them before, reviewed them before, talked about them before, and talked about them being some of my favorite watches of all time, but that doesn't really mean that I then can't let them go. I'm okay sort of cycling through certain watches. May also, if you've watched my channel recently, you may see that I've only just finishing reviewing a watch and then I've just sold it. Well, please keep in mind, my upload of videos isn't always in the same time frame of me actually owning the watches. Sometimes I make videos and I then don't release it for 2 or 3 months later. It's just the way that my schedule on YouTube works, and me trying to space out content a little bit. Sometimes I even release a first impressions video of a watch after having actually sold the watch. That's because I've made the first impressions video, I've worn it for a long period of time, I've fully reviewed the watch, I've then owned it for a long time and then sold it. But for some reason those videos haven't been put out until a bit later. So don't worry about time frames. I'm comfortable having had these watches for a certain amounts of times, and I've been letting them go. So which ones have I let go? And more importantly, which is the one that I took back out of the drawer? Well, let's start with the first 5 that scared me the most to sell, and I'm still a little bit concerned that I sold them. I'm happy with the decision to sell them, but it was still a bit of a hard hurdle to get over. The first one was my King Seiko. Beautiful watch, but it was time to let that one go. Next was the Oris Pointer Date. Oh, an absolutely beautiful watch, and it was hard to let it go, but it was time. Probably one of the hardest ones to let go was the Tissot 1938, one of my most worn watches of last year, and a watch that I'm absolutely in love with. But I've just come to the time where I've had my time with it, so it was time to let it go. The Damasco DS30, a watch which I never ever expected to sell. In fact, I invested more into that watch to buy the metal bracelet, and I wore it a lot. I actually owned that one for quite some time, but I just felt like it was time to let it go, unfortunately. The biggest surprise, however, was my Accutron SpaceView 2020. This one I bought knowing that it was expensive, knowing that I loved it, knowing that I shouldn't ever sell it. But I got to the point where I think I was just ready to sell it. And I only sold it at a price which I was comfortable as well. I wasn't willing to take a big loss on that one. So I put it up for sale with the idea was, well, if it doesn't sell, that's okay. But it sold almost straight away. I also sold my Erebus, my Selton, my Bulliver Computron, which was a surprise for me actually. I didn't really want to sell it, but I just wasn't wearing it. The Timex Snoopy, the Yamaha Rallygraph, my Cigar Design Blue Planet, which also was a bit of a surprise for me. That is an incredible watch, but it just wasn't one that I was wearing, so I just had to let that one go too. My Omega Dynamic, which I only actually sold because the bracelet just wasn't comfortable for me, so I think it was okay to let that one go. My Hamilton Railroad, which I think was okay to let go. Beautiful watch, but hard to let go. But it was also my Glycine Combat Moon Phase, which was probably one of also the hardest watches to let go. That one I also said, well, I'm not going to sell this one cheap. I'm only going to sell it if I can get this certain amount of money that I'm comfortable with. And it also sold very, very quickly. All of these watches now have left my collection. All of these watches have put some money back into my watch budget, but more than that, it has reduced my collection down to a much more manageable size. I'm going to do a stated collection in a couple of months, once I sort of round out my collection a little bit more, and I look forward to doing that. But I really just wanted to share with you my ideas of why I've consolidated some of my watches and which ones I'll let go. It was a list of some very nice watches that I absolutely love, but it was a list of watches that I had to personally need to sell because I just needed to reduce that collection. But what was the watch that I actually ended up pulling back out of the drawer? One that I thought, I actually need to sell this. Well, it was my Stowa Classic 40. One of the first sort of more expensive watches that I bought, a watch that it took me ages to sort of build up the confidence and sort of the want of this particular watch. And when I sort of had it, I ended up not wearing it as much as I had hoped. So I sort of thought, oh, okay, I'm not wearing this one a lot, so maybe I'll sell this one. But what I found was two things. Firstly, I missed it very quickly. And secondly, once I'd reduced the size of my collection, it actually then became a watch that I started wearing a lot more. So that concern about not wearing it enough, that went away completely. It was just that I had too many watches and it wasn't getting the attention that it deserved. But secondly, I really missed it. So that one is definitely in the collection and is not going anywhere, not for a long time. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'd be really interested to hear what your thoughts are about this sort of experience of consolidating watches. I can almost imagine there's going to be some comments down there saying, how did you sell that watch? Why did you sell that watch? That was your favorite watch. Why did you sell it? Well, I hope that the message of why I sold it has already come through for this video. It was the right thing for me to do. I just can't physically have that many watches and be comfortable. It was something that was a right decision for me, and it was something that has made me more comfortable with my collection, and it's also ended up giving me some funds to buy some watches that I probably would not have been able to justify or afford otherwise. Thanks for watching, guys. Maybe check these videos out next.